most of us here are in Ottawa. So myself and Rami, we're actually in this co-working space called Baby Yards. And we started our group, I think, around June of last year. And recently we started doing like webinars with people who are doing like cool stuff around the world. And me personally, I've seen your project before, and I didn't realize that you were part of AI Tinkerers, and you're based in Seattle, is that correct?
Yeah, I'm in Seattle.
Awesome. And I was just like, I'm gonna shoot my shot. I'm gonna send you a DM because you mentioned AI Tinkerers Ottawa. So I'm like, this is my shot.
First of all, so hello everybody. My name is Killian, and I am the lead developer on Open Interpreter, which is an open source project where kind of the thesis of it is how do you get language models to control computers? And the way that that is looking now is like a code interpreter. So it's letting these things run code. Yeah, so by the way, in just AI Tinkers land, I am such an AI tinker. It is like my blood. I've been hosting the last couple of events in Seattle, and we literally are just like constantly looking to Ottawa to be like, wow, what is it that you are doing? Like, I want to copy everything you're doing because there's something very, very special happening in Ottawa around AI Tinkers. Like an anomaly in the data special. Because I'm sure, you know, if you've been on Joe's like, you know, web page in the background to like be able to see how all the stats are. Something's happening in Ottawa. Something's happening in Berlin too. We got to figure out what's going on over there. They had like 700 people or something like after only like 2 meetups. And not too different in Ottawa. Seriously, seriously impressive. And it's crazy too, because Open Interpreter is an AI Tinkerers project. Like, I mean, it is the baby of AI Tinkerers very much, because I've been building it with Ty Fiaro, who I met through AI Tinkerers. You know, the only reason I was able to do it was because the main AI Tinkerers guy out here who was hosting at Joe Heitzberg offered me a job, which on my first day, I went and drove my 3-hour commute to go to it. And on the first 20 minutes, I quit because that was the day I launched Open Interpreter, and it was already #1 on GitHub. So it was not a bit of a burn bridge just for that moment. But yeah, Open Interpreter and the way that that all started with me. First of all, I'll go back to 2020 because, you know, I was going to Western Washington University to be a middle school science teacher. And I'd actually just, like a few years earlier, I dropped out of high school because I wanted to make dubstep, which did not pan out. But then I went back, I got my GED, and then went back to college to be a middle school science teacher. Because I thought I was not smart enough to really do the stuff. I would probably, though, I think I could talk about it, though, and could teach it. And then GPT-3 came out in 2020. And it was like, okay, so either I'm going to be a part of this or I'm going to watch it happen in the next few years. Because it seemed clear then that like this thing is powerful. And there's no world where it doesn't happen or it happens very slowly. I think it's going to happen very quickly. So I dropped out and broke my mother's heart twice. I was like, she's like, you're back, you're doing it, you're on track. I'm like, I got some bad news. And then like I go to my first tech job that I get out of it, and I'm like, hey, I quit on day 1. She's like, this is a pattern. But in 2020, when GPT-3 came out, I dropped out. I started learning to code on like Colab notebooks and stuff, and then I moved to Replit. I still, up until very recently, did not run any code at all on my own laptop. I'm like an entirely cloud-born programmer. OpenInterpreter was built on Replit. And, you know, a lot of it came just from me trying to build startups in that area. So I wanted to do something. Once GPT-3 came out, I was like, okay, I need to be a part of this. And I tried a bunch of shit out. All of it failed. And one of the big ones, though, was trying to make something that was basically like the GPT store, where you would like be able to make a GPT and you'd be able to connect it to some knowledge and connect it to some tools. And it still didn't do well, but there was something I noticed, which was that one type of GPT that had access to only one tool was blowing every other one out of the water on every benchmark. It could do everything that every other GPT could do. It did it with way more flexibility and the ability to move information around its system. And that tool was a code interpreter. It was able to just write the code for whatever tool I went and built for it. So like, okay, something weird is happening there. And it started to make the whole like function calling tool approach seem like we were reinventing the wheel, and that these things are language models. They make language, and we have been trying for decades to figure out what the ideal language interface is into computers. It's code. We've been pouring tons of time into making this a very beautiful way for humans to control computers through language. So I just open sourced that part. I just threw the rest of it out. I was like, all right, this is just a thing that you can talk to it like it's a language model that can run code. And the idea too that by just running code, you actually don't need something trained on function calling. So for example, a really popular model to use with Open Interpreter is Mixtral. And that works because you can actually just have this thing parsing. By the way, I don't know how technical the audience is, if it's sort of something that would be fun to go into, or if it would be like, let's keep it high level. What do you think?
Yeah, we're fairly technical. I think, at least on this call, maybe like 100% are at least developers.
Yeah.
Oh, great. That's great.
Let's do it.
Okay, sweet. Yeah, so no, I mean, this is a simple thing, but just the fact that like, you know, when a model that doesn't have function calling is used in Open Interpreter, the Open Interpreter is super simple. It's the idea that you equip language models with the ability to run code. So for function calling models, that means that they have one function, the execute function, and the parameters are code and language. So you let them provide some code that like gets all the files in your desktop or something, and then a language like Python. Then we run it and we then send it back to the model. And it very much is like ChatGPT's code interpreter. Have you ever played with that? And now it just happens automatically. I think within it, it's like just the analysis portion of ChatGPT, but it runs locally. And by just doing the code part, you can do things like, you know, the way that it runs code and calls the function is actually just by using 3 little markdown backticks and then specifying the language. You know, we've all seen that if you ask this thing for like shell code, it's like tick, 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 shell, and then write some shell code. And then once it closes it out, we just go and we run it. This is very, very intuitive for language models. Way more intuitive than function calling. Does not need to be fine-tuned. And it's intuitive because it's in distribution. Like there's a tremendous amount of data out there about these things, just spitting out code and markdown code blocks. And that means that Open Interpreter is totally language model agnostic. You can plug anything in there. We make it very easy to connect to Claude, you know, to connect to everything on Together AI, all the new Hermes models, all of the Phi2, Mixtral. It is all capable of piloting your computer. And there's a lot of other stuff we're working on to try to figure out how to get to build the technology that lets language models control computers. That's really the goal. And there's more to it than that. But yeah, so I'd say that's how it came about. And that's a little bit about the project itself.
Yeah, so in case any of us don't know, Open Interpreter has about like 40,000 stars on GitHub now. So it's like you mentioned before, it blew up on GitHub, became like the #1 project on GitHub in the world for like 5 days straight. And so are you currently working by yourself, or are you do you have like a team that's maintaining this full time?
Yeah, so on the open source repo, it's mainly me and a couple of folks who have come out. I mean, over time, there have been different people that cycle through the open source community, and I've got the chance to work with like dozens of extraordinary people, because it's fully open source. And I'm still like lead maintainer and write most of the code, but part of this too is that we also have a desktop app that we've been working really hard on, which is trying to be like, all right, well, can we make it so that you can use this technology, you can use Open Interpreter without having to know how to use Python and have a terminal, where we just want like, you just download a desktop app and you start talking to it. And the guy who's leading the desktop app right now is Ty, and Ty is who I met through AI Tinkers. There's also this guy, Mike, also who's up in Canada, Mike Bird. He was like within the first 1 or 2 weeks, one of the first people to get it running on an Android, which is very interesting. The idea that you can just use this to make any device have a natural language interface. Take a picture with the front-facing camera, kind of stuff. And Mike is now going to be joining us full time. His first day is tomorrow. So now it's just us. It's just the three of us as a team. Now there is other stuff that's happening as we're trying to build an open source RabbitR1, which is a little bit of a different project, but it has a lot to do with Open Interpreter, and that team is different. But yeah, on Open Interpreter, it's me and Ty and Mike.
Great. Somebody has to remind us that we should really reach out to Mike, get him on the webinar at some point. That'd be great.
Yeah, he's not far from Ottawa.
Is he in Toronto or Montreal or something?
I don't know. He's in a tiny 600-person town, and he's like on the board of the Chamber of Commerce out there, and he's like telling me about doing like events where he recognizes everybody. I don't know. I should send it to you. He has a bed and breakfast, not an Airbnb, out in a tiny town, I think not far out of Ottawa. He'd love to come out. I've told him, I'm like, you got to get to the AI Tinkers events. They're the best ones.
Awesome. So about generating text and then have the 3 backticks, and then that's where the code block is, and you run that code block. Is that like, in my head, I'm thinking like, that sounds like some really simple like text parsing at the end, right? Like you just have it generate whatever it wants, and then at the end, if there's code, run whatever that code is. Is that right?
Exactly right.
That's it. That's literally it.
Yeah. So, I mean, here's the thing. To have this thing, here to me is what made this project the one that people were drawn to, because this has been done before. I mean, this Sharif Shamim was having these things run code in 2020, and that's where that was one of the big things that honestly inspired me to drop out. It is not a new idea. And I think that the reason why this was one of the ones was because, first of all, it is a total rethink of the way that these things use tools. Like the alternative to function calling is a totally fair way of, I think, looking at it. And so it is seriously central, this one thing. And yeah, it's just a parsing thing going on at that part of it. Most of the work has been doing, okay, what does a real-time code execution environment look like for language models? So this is like something that can very robustly like handle a bunch of different languages, and also can emit their outputs in real time. So this surprised me, because this actually is not even a language. Like I feel like a lot of people are finding this, that like you go to build something for language models and for AI in the space, and like 99% of what you do has nothing to do with language models, and it's just building stuff. I guess we're application layer companies, most of us, so we're not like the intelligence layer, so that makes sense. But still, you'd think that there would be something really great that would just let you put in any language, run it, and get real-time streaming output of it. And the closest thing is Jupyter, but even that, like Jupyter is running at the center now of the latest open interpreter, but it's still, it requires a lot of cajoling to really get it to look good and to feel good and to be useful for the language model to use. But the idea of real-time streaming output in your terminal is I think quite a lot of what's fun about this. So a lot of it is like, honestly, thanks to Rich, which is the library by Textualize, which gives us these beautiful code blocks and code output blocks in the terminal. It just is eye candy. Active line highlighting of when the code is, which line is being run, things like that. And trying to build a library then that people can build their applications on top of. That, for example, you can import interpreter and then say interpreter.chat and ask it to do something like, what time is it in Ottawa or something like that, and actually treat it like a generator in Python. So you can just be streaming out chunks first from the language model and then code that the language model wants to run, and for it specifies everything about the code. And then as soon as it's done writing the code, it starts streaming the output of that code along with the active line that's being run and things like that. So you can build a very beautiful UI around it. But yeah, it just is a laser-focused project on code interpretation and on a real-time code execution environment for language models. And then there's another part to this whole thing too, which is the idea of like, all right, now that we know, and 2023 to me was the focus of building a great code execution, real-time code execution environment for language models. 2024 has been, it seems that some of these packages that it can run are very easy for it to understand and are very easy for it to control. Some of them are not. Some of them, this method of running code, where this is not really something you see in GitHub repositories too, is this type of code where like you're like trying to run code and then figure out things about your system and then navigate around the world by like, it's like you're in like a black box and you can only run code. Some libraries are very great. They're verbose. They fail very quickly. And they work very well with that kind of thing. So kind of biasing it towards using those packages is something that we've played with. How do you do that with RAG and stuff like that? But what's way better is to be like, all right, well, let's start making some of our own. So 2024 really has been like this last month has been all about the computer API. So this is a new part of Open Interpreter, which is trying to say, let's build our own tools for language models. But they're not really tools. It's just, this is literally a Python package, the computer API. And it's meant to be kind of expose all the foundational capabilities of a computer through a Python package, is especially great for multimodal models. So for example, you can run like computer.view, and that returns a screenshot of what's on the screen so that a multimodal model can see what you're looking at. Computer.mouse.move Apple logo, or the name of some icon, and then it will find the Apple logo on the screen and go and click it. So you just have now built a way for multimodal language models in that case to control your mouse and your keyboard and to see what's on your screen, and in a way that's intuitive for them because they know how to write this code and how to pass it around. This new update 0.2.1 is going to be coming out either tomorrow or on Monday, maybe, which is just introduces a ton of new computer API stuff into this. Like, what does it look like to rewrite the browser for a language model to operate? What does it look like to, and that's just like wrapping Selenium, but in a way that all this stuff we've learned about what makes these things very good at operating them. What does it look like to rewrite the file system? So now it's going to be computer.files. Just has all this incredible new technology in it, like that lets you semantic search over anything on your computer. A lot of things that are not, they were not built because Python, the whole Python ecosystem, as fun as it is to expose that to everybody, and that to me is actually a lot of what's cool about this project, is that it basically exposed a ton of the Python ecosystem to people that don't really know how to use Python. Like pretty much every library became like an app that you could call by just like asking your computer to do it. And as much fun as that is, it's really seeming to be the way to try to give it the flexibility to be in a real-time code execution environment, but bias it towards using these really LLM-friendly packages. I mean, the computer API is written for language models to use. As far as I know, it's the first Python programming package that is. And yeah, so that's true. That's a bit of the roadmap and stuff, and a bit deeper into the technology of it, is that it's real-time code execution environment for language models, and also the computer API, which is for language models.
That's incredible. So to recap what you said, language models like to use Python libraries that are more verbose, that has a lot of logging, so we can understand what's going on and then kind of like think and write more code afterwards. And what was one thing that was like surprisingly easy when you're building this new library, computer API, and what was something that was like surprisingly difficult about building it?
It was surprisingly easy to get the kind of IO stuff to work, where like someone recognized this the other day too, that OI, Open Interpreter, and IO just flipped with something fun there. But getting it to just control, like, have access to the clipboard, have access to the mouse, have access to the keyboard is just PyAuto GUI. Like, I kind of thought that would be a little bit more. Very thin wrapper around PyAuto GUI with an extremely thick amount of technology getting it to figure out where to click. That has been shockingly hard. One way that folks have approached this, like, for example, Josh Bickett, who's extraordinary, made this thing called the Self-Operating Computer Repository. If anybody heard that also blew up. Fantastic library. And the way that it was working was by having, screenshots would get sent to GPT-4 Vision, and then you would ask it to emit coordinates as to where it was going to click. And what they would do is they would draw on the screen a grid that had like the X and Y coordinates along that grid, so that you could imagine it would be very easy. Like, you just look at where the button is that you'd want to do, and you can see that the text there says, like, I think that it was not pixel coordinates even. It was like, you'd see like, 5x, like 6y or something like that. And then the language model would emit something like that, and then it would use that to go and click it. And it became pretty clear to me that this was kind of like asking language models to do math, bizarrely, that this kind of spatial plus bounding box sort of thing, it was just for the current language models a little bit closer to them doing math, and that it was not really in distribution, and that it was kind of hard for them to do it. But what they're great at is saying, click compose. They easily could do that with these multimodal vision models. So, okay, well, can we give them some tools? I mean, that's what the computer API is like, let's kind of bootstrap a language model and try to do the stuff that it would otherwise have to write a ton of code for. So computer.mouse.click takes text. You can put in computer.mouse.click compose, and it will use OCR to find compose on the screen and click it. So that's a very, very different level of difficulty for a language model, is to try to find like the coordinates of something versus just saying, this is the text on that button or that link or in that text box. For YouTube, it can very easily click the search bar. It just says click, like, search here or whatever is in the YouTube search bar. You can click on YouTube videos by putting out the title of the video that it can totally easily read. By the way, Open Interpreter is, again, language model agnostic. I think of it totally as an application layer thing. This works with other multimodal language models, including locally running ones. So it's not just GPT-4V is the only one you can use with it. It's just the thing that lets any language model run code and return like image outputs and then make decisions based off of that, or text outputs or any kind of output. And what's even harder than that, and this is what I've been working quite a lot with Vic, if you'd seen him on Twitter, who just released Moondream. Has anybody here heard of Moondream? Leonard? Moondream is a 1.6 billion parameter vision model that it is not fair, it is not reasonable how intelligent this thing is. It's ridiculous. And I really encourage anybody to try it out on Hugging Face. It's a lot of fun. 1.6 billion parameters. Totally changes, the dream was always to try to have a really, really good local mode in Open Interpreter that you could go interpreter -- local, and everything would run locally. You turn off your internet. And so far I'm working with Justine Tunney at Llamaphile at Mozilla to try to figure out the best way to do that. I'm working with Yags at LM Studio to figure out the best way to do that. These are great, brilliant people, the most brilliant people of our time in inference. And Moondream is just way ahead of where we should be for these really tiny models that can run on really small devices. And it has the capability of emitting bounding box for things. Like, you can ask it for something in an image, and it will emit coordinates that are around where that thing is. So working with Vic to be like, all right, well, let's train one of these things for the GUI. Let's train one of these things to operate a computer and to be able to, around any icon, around any, even with dragging actions or something. It'd probably be something that another language model, like a planning heavy language model that understood how to write code, would use to identify objects on the screen, the same way that like that OCR trick works. But even just rudimentary tests, and I'm actually about to tweet out a demo of what we got, have been, everything's different since the thing came out. And the promise of this being something that can run locally or run on very small devices is feasible. But yeah, so that would be my very long answer to like, well, it's very easy to get it to do the things that actually do the stuff on the computer. Yeah, I'd say the same thing too about AI file system. Like, why is there not a library that lets me do semantic search over a folder? It's just ridiculous. So we had to make one. It's called the AI file system. MIT licensed its own thing now. It's cool. And very hard to try to get it to find things on the screen. And yeah, just shocking how hard it is actually to do some good semantic search. Yeah.
Great. I have a few more questions about that, but so more about like segment everything, and maybe use that with like trying to figure out where to click and which zone to click, and also like I want to ask your opinion about other projects like multi-on and like all those like running agents on your computer. But I want to be mindful of time. Do you still have couple more minutes for like open Q&A with everybody?
Oh my God, yeah, I totally forgot. So I think my next thing is at 11:30.
Thanks for the explanation of where you are. Very interesting stuff. I have a ridiculous suggestion that you've probably thought about, but with regard to finding things on the screen, have you thought about using, for example, on Apple, their assistive display? So it really makes it high contrast and the buttons pop out. You use the operating system's capabilities to your advantage, in other words.
Yes, I actually could talk so much about this, so I'll try to. So I will. Okay, so this goes both ways, in the sense that you really quickly realize that one, pretty much everything that has been built for accessibility is very smart to rely on for language models, because in a sense these things, at least especially pre-vision models, but they're essentially like people with low vision, and the technology that was built to let people use computers when they were blind or had low vision is the same technology that makes language models able to use computers. The accessibility tree is a very powerful interface for language models, for example, to be able to use a browser or use the computer. And high contrast display is absolutely a part of it. So it is 100%. The stuff that goes into that gets fed into the model, we do a lot of work to try to, do as much as we can beforehand, assuming that this thing is going to be have difficulty seeing things and locating items. So there's a bunch of transformations that get applied that look a lot like what we do for people that have low vision. And so this goes that way, and that there are many things like that, or things that were built for accessibility. Even frankly, this, I think we're going to start to find more and more that stuff that was built for remote work. So like this thing that we're all on now, where I can like open up a whiteboard and do things, and there's all this way that I can interact with other humans that are not physically here, is going to be extremely useful for language models that are also not physically here. And tools that we built for accessibility and tools that we built for remote work, I think are going to really help realize this dream. And at the same time, it goes the other way. I really think that when Vic and I train this GUI understanding model, where you can say, click the search bar, click. And right now, by the way, there's a version of it that works. It's very small. And this is what the demo too that I'll post is what our progress is on optimizing that. That is capable of finding icons on the screen. Click the crop icon, click the X button, click these things that you don't use OCR for. And it could be a lot better, but even where it's at, it is better than any accessibility tool I have ever used. When we build stuff for language models like this, I mean, it's sort of embarrassing, it feels like, for humanity. But honestly, I think that a lot of the things that we end up building for language models will be the best accessibility tools that ever existed, especially Open Interpreter. To me, if you get a language model to control a computer, the reason why I became a middle school science teacher and why I thought that was the most important thing I could be doing with my life was computer literacy. And it was the fact that nobody talks about it, but the difference between somebody's life when they know how to use a computer or they don't, that is one of the greatest divides in society, because of how much we have organized all essential services, governmental services and everything. We gate it behind being able to use a computer. And I get that. Until you have something like I had a very formative experience where my grandma asked me to fill out a V8 housing form. She's a veteran. And I couldn't do it. Like, I went online and I could not figure it out. Like, it was just terrible design. And that was cruel. That was cruel of the government. Like, I think bad design when you are trying to, disseminate essential services is cruel. And there is an opportunity with language models to make it so that folks that don't know how to use a computer, they don't have to. You ask it to fill out like a Medicaid form. You ask it. You have a way of lowering the barriers to all of humanity's greatest digital tools, even the simple ones, which I care more about even than the more powerful workstation-y ones. I really care about, can this thing fill out a Medicaid form? Can this thing fill out a V8 housing form? And I really think that we're going to end up building the greatest accessibility tool that has ever existed if we solve this. And let people who, like the 0 to 1 folks on computer literacy, because nothing will change your life as much as really knowing how to use a computer. Can you even imagine a society where everybody you knew how to use a computer as well as some of the greatest people that you know how to use computers? So this goes both ways. Both it's great stuff for accessibility, to use them with language models. And I think that the development of language models and tools for them is going to radically improve accessibility. technology, especially in my case around computer literacy. That's a great point, though. I really love that.
Cool. Thank you very much. I don't want to monopolize your time, but just going back to Moondream for 1 minute. So yeah, you see my Twitter feed. There's not a lot. There's not a lot I haven't heard of, I think. But do you know if anybody is training a model specifically for GUI versus Moondream is, like you said, amazing. It's I don't know how many images they've trained it on, but it seems to me that if you only trained a model on GUIs, you should even get a smaller, faster model.
I totally agree. Yes. So Vic, again, who made Moondream, he's on the O1 core team. Quickly becoming a great friend of mine. I met him at AI Tinkerers. And yeah, he's the creator of Moondream, and the idea that we're going to try to figure out, you know, how to get this data set. It's the number one thing that we're talking about is let's make a version of Moondream that is specifically for controlling GUIs and showing it tons and tons of bounding box pairs to elements on the screen. And I think a lot of that data can be generated synthetically, to be honest. But yes, exactly. I think we will be the first to do it. And also, of course, there's Adept, whose landing page I copied, and a bunch of other people too who have thought about this, about trying to, and Multion you mentioned too, hi, folks that have thought about ways that this LLM computer interface can be built. But I'm really, really a fan of tiny models in a way that none of these other people seem to be thinking about. And thanks to AI Tinkers, have access to who I think is the smartest person in the world about tiny vision models.
We got a minute. I'm curious if you've seen anything being done with the Raspberry Pi 5 so far. They just finally came back in stock, and I'm tempted to order one, but I want to do it obviously with an AI angle.
Yes, yeah, I just did. I literally just ordered a Raspberry Pi 5. So yeah, actually, this would be a good time too. I'd love to talk a bit about the O1 project, which is this idea of creating a. Oh no way, Leonard! Is that the 5 or is that a 4?
That's a 3B. We have to get things running on a 3B. Sorry.
On it. Yeah, but the idea of there's a lot of what I talk about with Vic is like, okay, Raspberry Pi 5, what is our tokens per second on that thing? Because this is very, very exciting for so this other project too, which is the O1, is this idea of the Rabbit R1 came out, if anybody's kind of familiar with that, where this thing, you can talk to it and it seems to control a computer in the background, which I love, and I'm so into it. And the idea that we could have an open source version of that thing that other people could build startups on top of, and that if you're just like a hacker at home and you have a Raspberry Pi, you could throw one of these things together, would be sick. So we on last Saturday, the Saturday before this last one, actually, we had about 15 people or so come out. I just tweeted out, I was like, does anybody want to build this with me? I'm in Seattle. And a bunch of people responded, and a lot of them were in Seattle. And so I got together with the 15 best of them, and had just whiteboarded out what does this look like? What can we do? Then the next Saturday, so this last Saturday, brought everybody out to Airbnb, and from 12 p.m. to 5 a.m. we were coding, whiteboarding, and just being like, all right, we're going to bang this thing out, because it's time boxed. We have to launch it within 6 weeks from when I first said that. An open source Rabbit R1. And that starts by building an operating system. So we built it. We built an operating system in a day. That took a lot of people and took a lot of hours. At that next one, there was 20 people. I think they're going to just keep growing. There's more people that are a part of this. And you know, I'm very interested in getting everything working on a Raspberry Pi. To me, I want to get the operating system really, really nice. Like press a nice like ISO that is going to be the O1 OS. And this thing is, I could talk for a long time about this idea of a language model computer, which is like, all right, if you're starting to have these ideas about how language models control computers, you can kind of rethink what a computer is and ask yourself, what does it look like to build a new kind of computer with a language model at the center of it? Karpathy has a great tweet, LLM OS, that kind of sketches out an idea for this. That's what we ripped apart at our first meet, and we're like, what do we do to actually implement this? And we built it. And the idea of loading this thing up on a Raspberry Pi is the goal. And what we want to do is have it so that it basically would look at the hardware that it's been loaded up onto, and it would download a language model that would give you some good speed for that. So if it was a real beast that the thing was loaded up onto, then it would fire up Mixtral. And if it was a Raspberry Pi, it would fire up like Phi 2 and Moondream. Yeah, I actually am not a hardware person really. So I don't know too much about what it is going to look like. I trust these brilliant, incredible people that have decided to be a part of this project in Seattle. And the Raspberry Pi seems like it needs to work on that. I'm actually even more excited about it working on like old Android phones with a bunch of stickers on them. We'll get there, but the idea of it kind of being the Raspberry Pi for a new generation of startups that could build products like the R1, Tab, Pin, all that kind of stuff, and making a great open source operating system that was built for those kinds of products. Yeah, it's working on a Raspberry Pi is super important. And this next one, I just ordered a ton of stuff. I ordered like a NVIDIA Nano Jetson, $130 thing that is apparently pretty good at inference, and some like Coral stuff, Coral AI, which you can plug in as like a TPU kind of accelerator, and a bunch of Raspberry Pis. So we're just going to riff on that and build something. By the way, it's a different question too of making something that can run everything locally versus something that I think this is still useful, would be able to easily be configured to use some streaming LLM. Like I'm in general a total fan of this thing running locally. I want a tape recorder that I can hit a button on, talk to this thing, let go. This is a code running language model in my hand that can, tell me the whole entire Python ecosystem is exposed to this thing, but it runs locally so that I can bury this thing. And I can, you find it in 50 years and like dust it off with who's the president? That's like all wrong information. That's what I really, really want. But short of it running locally, there's the idea of having these things work on much smaller devices that could stream some of those operations with an internet connection. Anyway, so I actually forgot what the question was, but yeah, Raspberry Pi is a lot of fun.
Thank you for that. I gotta head out. It was a pleasure.
Oh yeah, take care. It was great meeting you, man.
Thanks, Killian. Take care. Bye.
Bye.
So I gotta head out too, but thank you for hopping on to this webinar today.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
We should follow up with some sort of talk about hardware next time. Maybe if you're free. I know you're super busy. So before we go, how can people find you online?
Oh yeah, so Open Interpreter is openinterpreter.com, and on Twitter, I'm Hello Killian is my handle, and that's probably the easiest place to find me.
Awesome. Well, thank you for your time. That's it for the webinar. So appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Yeah, Nick, Rosh, Charles, Jonathan, Leonard, Carla. That was a lot of fun.